registration for the 25th Ironman continues one by one. Some faces we recognize. Here is 58-year-old Richard Holcomb, number 214, back for a second try. He's legally blind and it doesn't matter to him. No, the thing that must occur at all costs is this time, cross the line.
It's more than a race. It's a lifetime event that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. They're either going to carry me off the course or I'm going to cross the finish line.
The stories about people like Richard Holcomb pass through this world as race week moves toward this morning. Hey, did you hear about the man who is legally blind? People love to tell and love to hear the stories. Then, appearing near the start line, where they've been before, are father and son, Dick and Ricky Hoyer. There is no one here who hasn't heard about them, their story, and a human commitment that goes far beyond and far back.
January 10th, 1962. We knew there was something wrong, but we did not know exactly what. The doctor said, forget Rick. Put him away, put him in an institution. He's going to be nothing but a vegetable for the rest of his life. We cried a little bit. We talked, and we said, no, we're not going to put Rick away. We're going to bring Rick home and bring him up like any other child. We knew Rick was smart. We could tell by looking in his eyes. And when we talked to him, he was paying attention to what we were saying. So we wanted to get a computer built so Rick could communicate with us. Everybody came to our house that night for Rick to say his first words. And everybody was betting, what is the first words Rick is ever going to say? His mom saying, it's going to be, hi, Mom. And me, the dad, saying, no, it's going to be, hi, Dad. Well, the Boston Bruins were going for the Stanley Cup, and the very first words Rick ever said was, go Bruins.
Dick is a military man, so he knows a thing or two about commitment. This time, he's just months removed from a heart attack. This gift that he gives to his son, or is it the other way around? Either way, it all started when Rick heard about a charity run for a paralyzed athlete. He asked Dad, and Dad said yes.
The gun went off, and we went off with all the other runners, and everybody thought that Rick and I would just go to the corner and turn around and come back. Well, we didn't. We finished the whole 5 miles, coming in next to last, but not last. And when we got home that night, Rick wrote on his computer, Dad, when I'm running, it feels like my disability disappears. So that was a very powerful message to me, that we finally found a sport that Rick could get involved in just like everybody else. Rick is my motivator. He inspires me. To me, he's the one out there competing, and I'm just loaning him my arms and my legs so that he can compete. There's just something that gets into me when I'm out there competing with Rick that I can't explain it, and we're able to go faster. And it's just an unbelievable feeling. Rick and I love the Ironman triathlon, to be out there competing with the best triathletes in the world, to be accepted to compete along with these triathletes. Just to be out there on that pier with all the other triathletes and then waiting in the water for that cannon to go off, it was just so exciting. The feeling coming down the finish line at Leahy Drive, it's just an awesome experience. With the crowd there, all the excitement, the noise, and the announcers announcing all that, your adrenaline just gets flowing.
I may be disabled, but I live a very fulfilling life. And if someone takes the time to get to know me, they will realize that I
graduated from public high school. He's graduated from college. He's out there competing in road races and triathlons. He lives a happier life probably than 95% of the population. Rick would tell you that, you know, if he was physically able to do something, that he'd probably play basketball or football or hockey. But then he always says, no, the first thing he'd do is sit down, have me sit down in his wheelchair and he'd push me. You know, it really makes me feel good that you know, he appreciates, you know, what I'm trying to do to help him out, and he'd do the same thing for me. Our message is, yes, you can. You can do anything you want to do as long as you make up your mind. You can do it.
If you have ever searched for the meaning of life, stop. The answer lies right here. By the way, Ricky would want us to tell you the Bruins look pretty good this year.
What you just saw there was the story of the father Dick and the son Rick Hoyt and their incredible journey in selfless giving. And to date, they have been racing over 30 years, plan to retire this year in their home city of Boston. And we're at mile 23 when the bombs went up. And then said, we can't let that stop us. So they have unretired for one more year and will run next year's Boston Marathon. In fact, they've become so prolific and well-known in racing circles, they now have a bronze statue of them built at the start line of the Boston Marathon. And this year, ESPN, the sports networks, hands out awards yearly called the ESPYs. It goes to the best of the best athletes. What our culture tells us is the measure defining that moment of success. Professional athletes from around the world come together to celebrate their own accomplishments. Look how great I am. And the people they chose to honor this year were this father and son team. In the midst of high-profile athletes who we would look at with earthly eyes to say they have everything that we could ever want or ask for, is a message about selfless giving. And if you've got any sort of human emotion in you, that does something to you. I've watched this video 8 times trying to prepare myself to get through their story without losing it. Because there's something about that story that touches us at the core of who we are. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it? What is it about that story with those people in a context far from us, at least geographically, that we look at and say, there's something in that I desire. There's something I see in that story that reminds me what it's like to be human. I don't know if you caught the line, but they said, they asked the son one time, if you could do anything, if you didn't have your disability, you could pick a sport, what would you do? And everybody's taking bets because he's a big football fan, or as you heard, he's a big hockey fan, loves the Boston Bruins. He said, the first thing I would do if I didn't have my disability is I put my dad in the chair and push him for once. There is something in that says he recognizes the sacrifice of someone else and is so committed to giving back to that person that they don't care about it. Oh, Spirit's moving today. There's something in that story that stirs our emotions. And I think we find an answer in Philippians chapter 2. We're in the middle of our Philippians series, so you can turn there if you want. If you're using the Pew Bible in front of you, it is page 804. If you find any comfort from being with the Liberator, this is from the Voice version. if his love brings you any sort of encouragement, if you experience true compassion with the Spirit, if his tenderness and mercy fill your heart, then brothers and sisters, here's the one thing that would complete my joy. Come together as one in mind and spirit and purpose, sharing in the same love. Don't let selfless and prideful agendas take over. Embrace true humility and lift your heads to extend love to others. We will get nowhere, Paul says, if our motives spring from selfish ambition or from indifferences to the plight of those around us. Get beyond yourselves in protecting your own interests. Be sincere and secure your neighbor's interests first. In other words, adopt the mindset of Jesus, your liberating King. Live with his attitude in your heart. What Paul says as he writes to the church in Philippi and as he writes to us is the reason the church gets stuck. Without forward momentum, without any sort of direction or purpose. It's because for the church to be successful, we have to be one in mind, one in spirit, one in action, one in purpose, one in direction. And do things without grumbling. Do everything without complaint, he says. That when the church is deciding on a new direction, we must say, we are united together. Now that doesn't mean we agree on everything. Paul's not talking about becoming clones. He is saying, what will bring the most people into the kingdom? And then unite behind that purpose. So we see a retired military dad with heart disease and just suffering a heart attack. His son comes to him and says, Dad, I want to run a race. And the father, we think, could have every right to stand up and say, look, I'm retired. I am way too old. We hear that sort of excuse in the church all the time. I'm too old to be of any use. And Paul says, if you're still here, you've got a purpose. So the dad who could have said, I'm too old, I'm too sick, I don't have anything of value, find someone else. I love you, son, but go get one of your brothers to do it. They're half my age, in better physical condition. Make your brother do it. No, the dad says, all right, I'm in. I will give you my body. I will give you the ability to run these races. And I'll have you know, their record marathon time is just under 30 minutes off the world record. So they are dedicated to training and helping each other. And then Paul says, that's a good image of what it looks like to care for somebody else. And meanwhile, I hear rumors that the church is arguing over the color of the carpet. Or which program is more important. Or what style of worship is better. Are we going to define ourselves as a traditional church or a contemporary church? And Paul says, it don't matter. Know your community and what they need to experience Jesus, and then unite behind that. What we lose is the image of what the church should be. It's in the old celebrated hymn of Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 6. Though he was in the form of God, he did not cling to equality with God. But he poured himself out to fill a brand new vessel, a servant in form, a man indeed, the very likeness of humanity. He humbled himself, obedient to death, a merciless death on a cross. So God raised him up to the highest place and gave him the name that is above all, so that his name, when his name is called, every knee bows in heaven and on earth and below, and every tongue confesses Jesus, the liberating King, is Lord, to the glory of our Father God. And literally Paul says Jesus is found as a slave. Most translations say it's a servant. That's really a nice way of putting it. Jesus agreed to become a slave. And in Greek culture, in the city of Philippi, where Paul was writing to, slaves are the lowest possible form of human beings. Because what's prized more than anything else is your freedom. If you can brag to being a free man or a free woman, you are high class in that society. And so Paul writes, Jesus took the form that everybody despised and showed us how God is working through that. And then Paul has the audacity to turn around and tell us, now you go and do that. So what does our culture prize the most? Maybe we're more about the money. So Paul's response then would be, so Jesus came as the poorest among you, and you should go and do likewise. Or maybe we live in a society that values power, influence, status. And Paul says, for the Jesus follower, you need to turn around and bless others. Rather than hoarding power and seeking your own glory, rather than defining your own measure of success, Paul says, give it away to everybody else. Become nothing. The higher you climb the ladder of success or influence or status or power, the less Jesus-like you become, is Paul's warning to us. You see, the problem with the American church lies not with its message or with its future hope. The problem with the church lies with Christians who have decided that it is more important to feel full and satisfied rather than empty and sacrificial. We have looked at this hymn and said, isn't that great? Look what Jesus did. And then we don't do it ourselves. The problem with the American church is that it cares more about consuming than caring. More about grapes than disciples, and more about styles of music than serving the least of these. Which is precisely what Jesus told us matters. That when we see a story like this, like the Hoyts, it stirs something within us because deep down there's this repressed feeling that, yeah, that's really what I'm called to. And I think, at least in me, it stirs something because I'm reminded of all the times I just don't do that. I would love to be your friend as long as I get something out of it. I would love to go out to dinner with you as long as you're willing to pay. Right? We set up all sorts of barriers and stipulations and guidelines to say we need to be mutually beneficial. And Paul says Jesus came as the most worthless and despised form, a slave, and then redeemed it for God's glory. And then Paul says, and even if I die, that's his reference to the drink offering. Even if I die, I want you guys to be encouraged because your faith is continuing to live on through others. That when you model that sacrificial giving, when you demonstrate true humanity and compassion to the least of these, when you take your eyes off of yourself and put them onto others and say, I will do anything to make sure you know Jesus. Paul says the faith goes on. And all of us here in some capacity, if we find ourselves following Jesus, have faith parents. Maybe they were our biological parents, or maybe it was someone we met at a bus stop or at a restaurant or sometime walking down the street, but we have those 1 or 2 or 3 people that we say made a profound impact in our life to tell us about the gospel. They gave up much so that you could be here today. being shaped by the message of Jesus. They decided it's worth getting out of my own comfort zone and sharing the good news with someone who hasn't heard it, and that's why you find yourself here today. For some of us, that took place within the church. Sunday school teachers willing to give up time to educate the next generation. But there are also those among us that have experienced it out in the world, in the marketplace, that have found themselves impacted by a stranger to say, "Can I tell you about the overwhelming love of Jesus?" So, what are we passing on? When we look at ourselves and the lives we're living, are we willing to say, like Paul, "I will pour myself out to those around me. I will become a slave to those that sit to my right and to my left, to those that live up and down the block from me, from those that I rub shoulders with at the grocery store"? Are we willing to give everything up for the sake of the gospel? Because what I hear a lot in the church culture today, as a pastor talking to other pastors, is that they're worried about the next generation of Jesus followers. Boy, the church isn't growing, it's dying. You can read statistics every day. Go to any Christianity Today magazine, and there is an article on why the church is dying. It's because we've created a culture in church that cares more about being comfortable, that likes to put on a nice smile and make sure their hair is done, and likes to drive up in fancy cars and say, "Look at me, I've got eternal security." Where what Paul says Jesus calls us to is taking the form of a servant. So now, my beloved, obey, as you have always done, not only when I am with you, but even more when I can't be. Continue to work out your salvation with great fear and trembling, because God is energizing you so that you would desire and do what always pleases Him. Paul says the continuing strength for a mission that, let's face it, is quite frankly hard and scary at times. It's easy to be comfortable. It's easy to sit here and sing pretty music and go out and say, "Boy, I've been to church, that was really encouraging to me," but then never actually share that with others. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting out of our comfort zone and saying, "I need to share my faith." And Paul says, so long as you are concerned about your preferences or your own personal choices, the church fails in its mission. Paul makes clear that the only hope the church has is when it gives itself up for the sake of others and for the world. Being found in human likeness, Jesus became a slave and gave up everything so that you could have a relationship with God. And that is the message the church carries into the world. We will become your slave. We will do whatever you can abuse and mistreat us. You can speak falsely against us. But we continue to love and serve, regardless of whatever you will do. So Dick Hoyt gave up for his son. Despite retirement and heart trouble, he said, "I want him to feel that." Another line in the movie that, in the clip that went by quickly, is after the first race, the son said, "Dad, when I'm racing, I don't feel like I have a disability." And the father said, "Well, if that's the case, then let's go run every weekend." And almost every single weekend for 30 years, the father has pushed his son and swayed his son around the country. Despite being too old or too out of shape or too young or too immature or too whatever labels you have been branded with, Paul says, as a member of the church, as a member of God's called out community that is supposed to be making disciples, whatever you have been stuck with, whatever label has bogged you down for your life, shake it off and serve someone. In another interview on CBS, he says, my son is the athlete, I'm not. He's heard accolades that, boy, if you would have dedicated yourself, you could have been one of the best endurance athletes our generation has seen. And he said, no, I couldn't. Because I don't have the passion. I don't have the desire. If it weren't for my son, I wouldn't be out there. He says, my son, Rick, makes me run faster. They give each other something because they care not about their own interests, but about the interests of the others. So here you go. As Joyce reminded you last week, October is Pastor Appreciation Month, and that means, Joyce said it, you have to do whatever I tell you to do this month. Joyce said it, not me. So just a reminder, you have to do whatever I tell you to. So first, here's the first thing you have to do. Look to your right and to your left. Who's sitting beside you? Now look to the front and to the back. Find someone around you. Chances are, one of the people that you just looked at, whether you locked eyes with them or just saw him in glancing, has hurt or offended you at some point in time. It's just the nature of being around people. We're screwed up, and we sometimes take our eyes off of serving others and decide to serve ourselves. So, here is your assignment that you have to do because it's Pastor Appreciation Month, and you want me to feel loved. I want you to get back at it. That's right, I, the pastor, am telling you, whoever in this church has offended you, you have full right to get back at it. But you've got to do it like Jesus did. Because remember, you have offended God a whole lot more than that person to your right or your left, or who's in front or behind you. And God's response was, then I will become a slave and serve you. So your job this month to make me feel loved and appreciated is to get back at someone who's offended you. Start serving them. Say, you know what? They hurt me. Those words I wish they would have said it. That one time when we were in that church meeting and they overruled me, boy, that really ticked me off. Maybe you said something else. That one time when we were arguing and they said that one thing that they knew I was afraid of, I had a really hard time with that. You have my full permission to get back at it. Take your eyes off of your own interests, off of your own self-satisfaction, off of your own desire to get them back, and serve them. That just as God has lovingly forgiven you, you have the incredible opportunity to pass that along. Jesus, who himself was God, was willing to forsake all of that and became obedient even to the cruelest, most painful, most embarrassing form of death for you. And then says, my church in this world should live and work in the same way. So our goal, our commitment for the rest of Pastor Appreciation Month is to see who can outserve each other the most. I give up my own preferences so that you can know how wonderfully blessed you are in God's eyes. I give up what I want so that you can know Jesus more. Though I would rather sit at home and watch the Broncos, I'm touching nerves today, I'm going for it. I will get out and tell someone the amazing love that God has for them. It's Jaguars, we're going to win. But Jesus poured himself out to fill a brand new vessel. A servant in form and a man indeed, the very likeness of humanity. He humbled himself, obedient to death on a cross. And God raised him up to the highest place and gave him the name that is above all names. So when his name is called, every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and below, and every tongue confess Jesus, the liberating King, is our Lord. The complaint of the church is that it's not passing on its faith. The reason it's not passing on its faith is because we've got to get out of our comfort zone. That if you could write a list, write down, who have you brought to Christ? And then that person that you brought to Christ, how have you continued to invest in them and they've been able to bring somebody else to Christ? And has that relationship grown enough that now that third generation has brought somebody to Christ? And the reality is, most of us can't make it to someone we've brought to Christ, and very, very few of us can make it to that third generation of, I brought this person and they've brought someone else. Because I think Paul's message is, we've become so consumed with our own desires, we've forgotten the one thing Jesus says matters: serving others.